MG is one of the most iconic British marques to ever exist. From its roots in the 1920s with the original MG sports car, the MG 1428, to the 50s with the incredible MGA, with another hit coming 7 years later, the MGB. Whether it's their original cars or the badge engineering exercises, MG is a formidable brand. But what if I told you there were some MG cars that are lost to time, with a collaboration with Aston Martin, an MGTF that produced 500 brake horsepower, or even a cancelled supercar? These are the incredible lost MG prototypes and concepts. Hello everybody and welcome to this video. If you're not subscribed, please make sure to do so. It really does help me out and you get to see more of this. Like the video and drop a comment below of your MG memories. Did you see any of these cars? Have you been involved in any of these cars? Or do you have any general MG memories of cars that you've owned produced by the marque? Now, without further delay, let's get into this one because this is going to be a good one. The Aston Martin MGB. September 10th, 1979 is one of the worst days in the MG marque's history because this is when British Leyland announced the worst decision it could make for the marque. The closure of its spiritual home, the Abingdon factory, after 50 years of production. Because of this and the subsequent outcry, on hearing these plans, a consortium was formed in October of that year, which comprised of some of the real heavy-hitting execs of the automobile industry and entrepreneurs. Alan Curtis, chairman of Aston Martin, David Wickens, the owner of British Car Auctions, Peter Cadbury, test pilot and great-grandson of John Cadbury, the founder of Cadbury's, and Lord George Brown of Norwest Construction Group. The group went public on their plans in October of 1979, with the plan to save Abingdon having at least 30 million at its disposal. The consortium went into talks with BL to propose taking over Abingdon's operations and acquiring the rights to the MG marque and MGB. With these key components, they could keep the factory open and keep building MGBs, but not as they were at the time, a new version in collaboration with Aston Martin. Negotiations went on, with a deal eventually being reached in April 1980, with BL retaining the MG name but licensing it to the new owners of Abingdon. During this time, Aston Martin had been developing their own version of the MGB, which they were to launch if the takeover of MG was successful in 1981. The car was a much needed and well executed facelift of the MGB, with new bumpers, colour schemes, wheels and a retrimmed interior, but as British Leyland does, it threw a spanner in the works, deciding after this reveal to close negotiations, closing the Abingdon plant for good in October of 1980. The Aston Martin MGB could have been the car to save the legendary Abingdon plant from closure, but this was not to be. But what of the car now? The car is still in existence and was sold privately, and then came back up for sale at Nutley Sports and Prestige in 2011. This car survives today in a private collection and is a complete one-off. The 1984 relaunch of the MG Midget. The MG Midget is one of the sports cars that became the template for others to follow. This small lightweight two-seater roadster was launched in 1961, with its production ending in 1979. The car was a huge success, with over 200,000 units produced over the 4 versions of the Midget. Years later, after many misses in the styling department and the need for a fresh approach, Austin Rover opened the new Canley design studio in the mid-80s, headed by Roy Axe. At the time, the only cars to wear the MG badge were rebadged versions of Austin's, namely the Maestro, Montego and Metro, with slightly more power, more aggressive styling and suspension upgrades. Roy Axe was looking to change this, spearheading the revival of the MG marque by means of platform sharing with the mysterious AR6. A new Super Mini Austin Rover were developing at the time. But this time it was different. It wouldn't be a simple rebadge creating an MG AR6. Roy wanted a real relaunch of MG, and what better to relaunch MG than a revival of one of its most iconic models for the 80s, the MG Midget. The team got to work trying to use as many of the in-development AR6 parts as possible to create a truly scalable sports car that could be produced alongside the up-and-coming AR6 Super Mini. Development commenced in 1984, with the first model being completed in 1985. The results were a funky little sports car that shared a lot with the AR6, with an exterior very comparable to the US market offering, the General Motors Geo Metro convertible. The car would be powered by the up-and-coming 1.4 litre K-Series turbo, which was in development at the time. The suspension setup would be conventional springs, moving away from the hydrogas that was a staple of Austin Rover's previous Super Mini range. The car would also be all aluminium, resulting in considerable weight savings. The car, though, was not to be produced, with Austin Rover axing the AR6 project, and in conjunction with that, the MG Midget was consigned to the history books once more. The final nail in the coffin, of course, was costs. There was huge costs involved in getting the car into production, producing the tooling, and getting the factory in order to produce the new car. This ended the development of the car that could have relaunched MG in the mid-80s, and the Super Mini that could have enhanced the Austin Rover lineup significantly. Instead, it was decided to go with the AR8 program, which produced the incredibly successful Rover R8 range, which was more cost-effective to introduce due to its platform share with Honda. It's not known what happened to the MG Midget prototype from 1984, but these are the only pictures we have of it, courtesy of AR Online. MG ADO21. The MG ADO21 is a story of infighting and ambition. In the late 1960s, after the formation of British Leyland, it was decided that MG would create a new sports car. But with the merger to create British Leyland, MG found itself in the same company with its other competitor, Triumph, who were also trying to get a car into production, the Triumph Bullet. MG set to work on the ADO21 project in 1969, with the MG team channeling some Italian influence, who at the time were producing mid-engine sports cars. The brief was simple. A sports car needed to be produced for both at home and abroad, with the ADO21 going on to be sold in the US as the British Leyland mid-range, replacing two of the most important cars for British Leyland at the time, the Spitfire and the MG Midget. The other stipulation was a big one, both physically and figuratively. The car had to use the E-Series engine, with the low end being powered by the 1500 E-Series inline 4 and the top end of the range being powered by the 2.2 litre inline 6 E-Series. With this though, it meant the sports car had to accommodate a very high engine, meaning some clever styling had to take place to package it correctly, leading to a very narrow rear window, almost mimicking Italian sports cars of the time. As the project went on, a few other issues were introduced into the mix. With the use of the E-Series engine came the use of the transmission from the Austin Maxi to reduce costs. This meant the 3-cable linkage that was already clunky on the Austin Maxi would have to be modified and lengthened for the mid-engined ADO21, resulting in an even worse change action. The car would also use hydrogas suspension. The project though started to run into some trouble. With the increased engine capacities, the car was encroaching on the MGB and Triumph's Bullet. Therefore, it was decided that these two projects would compete for funding, with the one that impressed the BL board the most getting to develop further into a production model. By the middle of 1970, a full-size model had been created, and it was a truly stunning car, with the front end in particular being universally admired by BL's management. However, there was another bump in the road. The pressure on the project team that was present at its outset seemed to dissipate almost immediately by this point. The reasoning for this is assumed to be the market research conducted by Spen King from the Rover Triumph division. It was found though that the American market did not want the MG ADO21. They didn't want a complicated mid-engine sports car. They wanted something simple and traditional. The British sports car they'd all grown to know and love. Front-engined, lightweight and rear-wheel drive. The project team then found themselves being asked to put the ADO21 on the back burner. After months of effort, with the disappearance of the people who made it happen, the ADO21 was simply forgotten by the company, until the decision was made to cancel the project in favour of the Triumph Bullet project, which would go on to become the TR7. The Bullet was what Americans wanted at the time: simplicity. The ADO21 was just too advanced and complex for that market, and under the corporate sports car policy, which only permitted one Halo sports car to be developed, it was decided that it had to be cancelled. The car lay dormant until 1971, when Austin Morris engineering director Charles Griffin visited the Abingdon plant and requested it to be destroyed. It's unfortunate that this mysterious sports car is lost. However, it's not all bad news. Some would say the MGF is the ADO21 realised for the late 20th century, incorporating many of the technical choices of the ADO21 30 years later, finally creating MG's mid-engined hydrogas sports car. The MG Metro 6-cylinder. The Metro is an icon of 80s British motoring. With the roots of its development in the early 70s, the Metro survived the 1975 BL bankruptcy to be launched in 1980 as the British car to beat the world. The Metro proved incredibly popular, with one of its most notable owners being a 19-year-old Princess Diana. In 1981, British Leyland confirmed that they would be expanding the range with a luxurious Van den Pla and MG version. But in 1986, a mysterious extension to this range emerged, an MG Metro like no other, one with a 6-cylinder engine. Alec Issigonis, after his retirement in 1971, continued on at British Leyland as a consultant, working on his passion, the 9X engine. This engine was a lightweight overhead cam engine that would replace the A series. The 9X engine was an experimental overhead cam engine with an alloy cylinder head and weighed only 90 kilograms. The engine itself was an evolution of the principles of the A series, small, lightweight and efficient, incorporating newer technology with capacities up to 1.5 litres and up to 6 cylinders. Ultimately though, the 9X did not see mass production, but as a demonstration of the 9X engine's 6-cylinder version, Alec Issigonis decided to create his last prototype. This deregistration MG Metro that retains all of the original MG Metro exterior, but has a surprise under its bonnet. A transverse mounted inline-6 engine with its gearbox underneath the engine in true Issigonis fashion. The car was a prototype to test the 6-cylinder engine application in a smaller car and was not destined for production. But with the death of Alec Issigonis in 1988, the fate of the project was sealed. The car was then donated to the British Motor Museum, where it resides today in its collection, and is road registered as D314 November Oscar Mike. The MG EX234. The MGB on its release was a hit that would prove hard to follow for MG, but the B wasn't without its problems. Although the performance and styling were held in high regard within MG at the time, the suspension system was a big disappointment. The reason for this was that the MGB had been designed around an independently sprung rear suspension setup, but due to cost and development time, the MGB on release fell back to the traditional live rear axle arrangement, with road testers and reviewers remarking on the MGB's disappointing road manners. This led to its replacement, the EX234 project being created in 1964 to build a revised MGB. But with the British Motor Corporation's move to hydrogas suspension in the mid-60s, this would be the direction the EX234 would follow. Due to this and other several factors within the EX234's development, it was decided to drop the idea of an updated MGB, with the car now becoming its own car. Pininfarina was assigned development of the bodywork and within months put together one of the most beautiful cars to ever wear the MG badge. The car was then produced in Italy with an A-series engine fitted and hydroelastic suspension. The EX234 incorporated the following: a 1275cc A-series engine and gearbox, an Austin Champ rear axle, hydroelastic rear suspension and front suspension, complemented by upper and lower wishbones all round. The steering was rack and pinion, and there were disc brakes on all 4 wheels. The prototype car was tested at Silverstone, with the experts remarking that the road holding was quite good and a considerable improvement over the MGB. But like most good things, when 1968 came, BMC and Leyland merged, killing off the EX234, which was a real shame considering it was a considerable improvement over the MGB. The story though isn't over. The prototype was purchased by MG dealer Sid Beer, becoming part of his MG museum in Cambridgeshire, registered as REW314R. The car was then offered for sale by the Beer Family Trust in June of 2016, selling for £63,000. The car still survives today in a private collection. The Mini-derived MG Midgets, the ADO 34, 35 and 36. Even before the end of its production in 1979, MG were thinking ahead for a replacement for the MG Midget. Starting in 1960 and ending 4 years later, MG decided to create and develop a replacement of the MG Midget in collaboration with Austin. The plan with this replacement was simple: produce a sports car that was based on the Mini's platform for MG and Austin Healey. As well as a roadster, a coupe version was also proposed, with ADO34 being the MG Midget, ADO35 being the Midget Coupe, and ADO36 being the Austin Healey version of the two cars. The design and styling was split between Longbridge and Abingdon, with Pininfarina assisting. Sadly though, these cars would not make production and were shelved by the late 1960s in favour of the ADO21 project and EX234. There were several cars produced, but only two survive: the coupe, which is now in a private collection, and the Longbridge version of the ADO34, which is currently preserved at the British Motor Museum. The MGTF 200 HPD. MG Rover in 2003 were trialling a car years ahead of its competitors, the MGTF 200 HPD, the company's first and only hybrid car. In the early 2000s, Europe's motorists were told low CO2 cars were the way of the future, which resulted in the great diesel sales boom. Hybrid cars, though, were thought of as boring, with the Toyota Prius being one of the few to make it into the mainstream consciousness. In 2003, MG were exploring alternative drivetrains, which led to the development of the MGTF 200 HPD, with MG Rover, Mira and Powertrain Limited awarded the contract to develop the car by the government's Energy Saving Trust in October of that year. The result was an MGTF with a difference: a K-Series 1.8 litre VVC driving the rear wheels and an electric motor driving the front wheels, with a Hawker SBS8 battery pack. This resulted in 200 brake horsepower and 50-50 weight distribution. All of these modifications took the car from 0 to 60 miles an hour in under 6 seconds, a significant improvement on the standard MGTF VVC's 0 to 60 of 6.9 seconds. But what became of the car? Well, this isn't known. There are no known sightings, meaning 2003 was the time the trail went cold. The car was either dismantled, stored at Mira, or it was sold off by PricewaterhouseCoopers when MG Rover went into administration in April of 2005. The MG DR2 and PR5 project. In late 1989, an MG like no other was penned at Canley, the MG DR2. During the late 80s, Rover Group was exploring ways to revive the MG name, which of course resulted in the production of the MGF. But before this, there were several proposals that were explored, including the DR2. The DR2 was styled to either fit into the MG name or the Austin Healey lineup, as the revival of both marks was seriously considered at the time. The DR2 was then created as a full-size model, with the signature Austin Healey sidelines and the front bearing the family genes of MGs of old. This car, in styling terms, was a winner for a halo model. But there was a problem. With Rover Group now owned by British Aerospace, money was tight, very tight. So the team turned to existing car models for prototyping, once the scale model had been approved by Rover's board. The proposal was passed to Roy Axe's DRA operation to build a running prototype. The engineering team, as told by Roy Axe, visited a local TVR dealer and bought a near concourse example of a TVR Tasman 350i. The Tasman would become the donor car for the DR2. It was then stripped down by the engineering team with a body fitted to its tubular chassis, retaining the TVR's original interior to save cost. The DR2 was then named the PR5 to fall into the Phoenix Route car line of the MGF/MG revival concepts. Sadly though, with Rover's exit from the US market in 1991, this meant the big V8 MG was not to be produced, with the MGF a far more fitting car for the European market winning out in the end. This car remains on display at the British Motor Museum. The MG ADO70. The MG ADO70 is best described by Keith Adams in his AR Online article. Styled in Britain, built in Italy, but abandoned in the UK. By the late 1960s, BL needed a small sports car for the USA to replace the MG Midget, giving birth to the ADO70 project headed up by Harry Webster. Paul Hughes and Robert Owen were tasked with the design of the Midget replacement, but with a twist. As tried before, this car would be based on the Mini. The team quickly created a two-seater Targa top to go head-to-head with the Porsche 914, which was becoming increasingly popular. The design was perfect for the American market at the time, but didn't have the MG family look that the motoring public were used to with the MGB and MG Midget. Once the design was finalised, Harry Webster commissioned Michelotti to create the prototype, donating a Mini 1275 GT as the base for the design. The Mini was then shipped to Michelotti's Turin design studio where work commenced. The car featured hydroelastic suspension, with the A-Series and front-wheel drive being inherited from the base Mini that had been donated. The ADO 70 was then handed off to Innocenti, who made the car functional. But then something remarkable happened. Rather than send the car back by ship or transporter, it was driven back to the UK on its own four wheels. Although its leaking hydroelastic suspension made it particularly tricky, so we can assume it was driven at quite a slow pace. Upon its arrival to British Leyland at Longbridge, the team were disappointed with the way the original design had been interpreted by the Italian team, with the board concluding that this package was not what the US market wanted. The car was then cast off, left to rot after its rejection outside the studio at Longbridge before being rescued. It was then restored and is now part of the British Motor Museum's collection. MG X-Power was the brand formed by MG Rover to take MG's sporting heritage to the next level. With a Le Mans debut, all that was needed was to turn up the heat on the already current MG Z car range to the point it became, well, X-rated. Several cars were proposed, one of the most notable, the MG ZRX. Arriving in May of 2004 at the MG Rover stand, the MG ZRX was the hot version of the MG ZR, a new splitter, 18-inch wheels, and it was sporting an MG X-Power badge at the helm with a new exhaust, modified cylinder heads, resulting in the range-topping MG ZR at the time producing 180 brake horsepower, with a 20 brake horsepower increase from the current range-topping ZR 160. It was proposed after the initial variants went on sale, more powerful versions would follow, using a K-Series bored out to 2 litres, producing 210 and 250 brake horsepower respectively, with engines built by race specialist Engine Development and a limited slip differential included as well for good measure. Not much is known about the show car. It appears from what I've read it went on to private ownership, and if you are the owner of this car, drop a comment below and let us know exactly what you're doing with it, and I'd love to have a look at it myself as well. The MG X-Power TF 500. The MGF marked the revival of the MG marque after years of dormancy in the sports car category. Launched in 1995, it became one of the most popular roadsters in the UK. At the turn of the millennia, with BMW's dismemberment of Rover Group and the sale of MG and Rover to the Phoenix 4, the MGF required a much-needed facelift, which led to the creation of the MGTF, another appropriately named car calling back to the MGTF of the 50s. Before its 2002 launch though, MG X-Power wanted to mark their formation and MG's return to racing at Le Mans, showing a preview of the new MGF successor in the way of an extreme version. At Le Mans 2001, the MG X-Power TF 500 was launched ahead of the launch of the new TF the next year. The 500 wasn't just an empty model designation either, powered by a race-bred 500 brake horsepower engine delivering power through a 6-speed sequential gearbox. AP racing brakes were used to bring the beast to a stop, and spoilers to add a bit of flair with a touch of downforce. The MG X-Power TF was not to be produced, but was described by MG at the time as a fun extreme showcase of where the MG brand was going. Not much is known about the fate of the car, with it selling in 2012 for £25,100. It currently resides in a private collection. As we all know, the halo car of the MG Z lineup was the MG ZT 260, but ProDrive, who developed this in collaboration with MG Rover, were originally given 2 distinct performance levels for the MG ZT. The core version, which we all know, the 260, and the extreme version, the 385 brake horsepower, more usable version of the MG ZT 500 concept. The prototype car developed 385 brake horsepower using a supercharged 4.6 litre V8 engine. The ZT 500, also known as the MG X500, was used at the MG ZT launch in its original configuration. It was then repainted in Typhoon and became the X385 Mark I, and did a few more shows, including one with the MG X80, the predecessor to the X-Power SV. The car then got converted again to a Mark II and was resprayed again and configured as a touring car to showcase the MG range's racing pedigree. The car in question was still the original X500 concept. This was then rescued by the MG Owners Club and restored to its original configuration. There were also rumours of a 385 ZTT being produced as a one-off for one of the directors without its signature body kit. However, I can't verify that claim, there's only one article about it. So the car in question, the X500 prototype, this is the only known 385 ZT in existence. The original plan for this car, of course, was to launch in late 2003 alongside the 260, completing the range as the ZT385. This car was even supposed to be created as a racing variant and entered in the DTM racing. The project was then completely crazy and sadly was abandoned in favour of just the 260 model. But this is what makes these MG Halo cars so special, the incredible story behind them. The MG X80 was a design concept and a Halo car for MG, supposedly to replace the RV8 as the V8 headliner of the MG range. The X80 appeared to resemble a TF and a ZT put together. Originally an evolution of the Mangusta, which MG Rover purchased the rights to in 2001, the concept debuted at the 2001 Frankfurt Auto Show and was supposed to be a 2+2 coupe. In September of that year, it was leaked that MG had a secret supercar in the making. Autocar had the scoop in their September issue. They'd seen the X80 coupe apparently on the roads. This car later became the MG X-Power SV. The X80 sadly appears to have been crushed and it appears to have just been a fiberglass mock-up. There are no other known details. However, it lives on in the TF and SV it later became. The MGF, as we all know, was one of the most successful cars to be produced by Rover Group. Once one of the most popular roadsters in the UK, is now a footnote in British motoring history. But there was another version proposed, the MGF Super Sports, known internally as the EX254, and later on the Super Sports 2. The original Super Sports was a design study for the Geneva Motor Show in 1998. Being developed in just 3 months, the car was a fully functioning car, apparently equipped at the time with a 1.8 litre supercharged K-Series engine, sporting 200 brake horsepower. AP Racing brakes were fitted, uprated race spec suspension in its usual mid-engine configuration. The interior was fully bespoke, white leather with red accented stitching. Styling wise, there were a few more changes, most notably the Spider style windscreen, new spoilers and diffusers, as well as new bumpers for improved aerodynamics and a good helping of max power. 2 years after the reveal of the Spider style Super Sport, a more traditional MGF Super Sports, the Super Sports 2, was developed and shown at the Geneva Motor Show in 2000. This was hoped to be the production-ready version of the Halo model MGF. However, this project met a similar fate to the rest of the Halo, MG and Rover models and was eventually abandoned. What happened to the cars? With the fall of MG Rover in 2005, MG X-Power Sport and Racing also went into administration. Following this, a public sell-off commenced. MG Sport and Racing were the official owner of both Super Sports, so naturally these went under the hammer as well. The Super Sport 1, the Spider version, ended up in a private collection after being sold at auction. It was, however, fitted with a non-supercharged 1.8 VVC K-Series and ended up selling in May of 2007 for £13,526. The Super Sport 2 had a colour change by MG and was registered under the reg Romeo 677 ROF and had a 1.8 VVC engine as well. The original black and red colour scheme was gone and the car was changed to chroma flare green with a green leather interior. In 2005 this was then sold for £15,950 and got sold again in 2012. MG is one of those brands that has stood the test of time, producing some of the most memorable sports cars of the 20th century and reviving MG Rover's fortunes in the early 2000s with the Z car lineup. Even though the current MG range is simply borrowing its heritage from MG's achievements as a British marque, we have to have an open mind to what they may offer in the future, as the octagonal badge should still command the respect it deserves.